Lena Alistair stood barefoot on the cold pavement, her suitcase beside her, staring at the mansion she once called home. Kieran Alistair, the billionaire she had trusted, had just sold the house without warning, leaving her, pregnant and alone, on the streets. As the luxury car sped away, taking him to his new life with another woman, Lena clenched her fists. She had lost everything. But across the city, Ashen Holt was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Lena was about to become the key to his ruthless plan. Lena Villani had spent years believing she had the perfect life. Married to Kieran Drax, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with power and prestige, she had everything a woman could desire. Their mansion stood like a modern-day palace, filled with exquisite art, designer furniture, and endless luxury. She traveled on private jets, wore diamonds worth more than most people's homes, and attended galas where she was admired and envied. From the outside, she appeared to be living a dream. But dreams, she would soon learn, could turn into nightmares in an instant. At 6 months pregnant, Lena felt her body change in ways she had never imagined. Though she had once carried herself with effortless grace, the weight of pregnancy made every movement feel slower, heavier. But she welcomed it, excited to start a family with the man she loved. Kieran, however, was growing more distant by the day. He worked late into the night, barely speaking to her when he was home. His once affectionate gestures had disappeared, replaced with cold indifference. Whenever she tried to reach for him, he pulled away. She convinced herself it was stress. Running an empire wasn't easy, and Kieran always had ambitious goals. He often reminded her that success demanded sacrifice. She thought perhaps that he needed space, that once the baby arrived, things would return to normal. But deep down, a gnawing fear took root, whispering that something was wrong. That fear turned into devastating reality one morning when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Standing on her doorstep were 2 real estate agents, their expressions professional, but tense. They informed her that the house had been sold and that she had only a few hours to vacate the property. Confused, she tried to tell them there had been a mistake, but they produced legal documents with Kieran's signature, confirming that the mansion was no longer theirs. Her hands trembled as she called Kieran, her heart pounding in her chest. When he finally answered, his voice was void of emotion. Without explanation, he confirmed what she had just been told. He had sold the house. There was nothing left to discuss. The cold finality of his words crushed her. Moments later, she received an email from his lawyers stating that she was to leave the property immediately. Her credit cards had been frozen, her access to bank accounts revoked. The luxurious lifestyle she had once taken for granted had been stripped away in an instant. Panic set in as she realized she had nowhere to go. The friends who had once surrounded her were all connected to Kieran. He was too powerful, too influential. No one would dare cross him to help her. She called her closest friends, but they either didn't answer or gave vague excuses. The house. Staff who had once catered to her every need avoided eye contact, unwilling to intervene. It wasn't until she started packing that she saw the full extent of his betrayal. All of her valuable belongings, her jewelry, designer bags, and expensive clothing, had already been taken. The closet that once overflowed with luxury was nearly empty. It was as if Kieran had planned this for months, ensuring that she would have nothing left. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, cradling the life growing inside her. The baby kicked softly, a painful reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for her child. But what could she do? She had no money, no home, and no one willing to help. As she walked out of the house for the last time, she saw something that shattered her completely. Alessa Vane, a woman she had always suspected of being too close to Kieran, stepping out of a sleek black car. She was wearing Lena's diamond necklace, the one Kieran had gifted her on their Anniversary. It was only then that she understood. This wasn't just a betrayal. This had been planned. Kieran had abandoned her, replaced her, discarded her as if she were nothing more than a burden, and now she had nowhere to go. Lena walked through the city streets, the cold air biting at her skin as she clutched her coat tightly around her growing belly. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion and heartbreak threatening to pull her down. The world around her moved on as if nothing had changed, as if she wasn't a woman who had just lost everything. People hurried past, lost in their own lives, oblivious to the once wealthy woman now homeless and abandoned. She had tried to find help, but everywhere she turned, doors closed in her face. The so-called friends who had once surrounded her at lavish parties suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Some refused to answer her calls, while others sent polite messages filled with empty words, wishing her well but making it clear they wouldn't be getting involved. No one wanted to risk angering Kieran. Lena sat on a bench outside a cafe, watching through the window as people laughed and enjoyed warm meals. Her stomach growled, but she had no money. The accounts she had relied on for years were all frozen, controlled by Kieran. She had never thought to set aside money of her own. Why would she? She had trusted him. That trust had cost her everything. She pulled her phone from her bag, hoping for a miracle, but all she found were news articles. The headlines were everywhere. Kieran Drax's new romance with Alessa Vane, his bold move to sell the mansion, and speculation about his divorce from Lena. The media had turned her into a story, but no one told the truth. They called her a scorned wife, implying she had been pushed aside for someone better. Some even painted her as a gold digger who had been cut off. None of them knew the reality, that she had been thrown away like garbage while carrying his child. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had to focus on survival. She found a small, cheap motel that didn't ask too many questions. With the little cash she had left in her purse, she paid for a room for the night. It was tiny, with peeling wallpaper and a bed that smelled of dust, but at least it had a roof. Sleep didn't come. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She replayed the moment the real estate agents had arrived, the cold way Kieran had spoken to her, the sight of Alessa wearing her necklace. It all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The next morning, she went to a lawyer, hoping to fight back, but Kieran had planned everything too well. The prenuptial agreement she had signed years ago left her with almost nothing. He had locked her out of his accounts, cut off all financial support, and made sure she had no legal claim to the house. The lawyer sympathized with her but made it clear, without resources, there was little she could do. Days passed in a blur. She moved from one cheap motel to another, stretching what little money she had left. Her body ached from the stress, and the pregnancy made everything harder. Every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman she no longer recognized, pale, tired, and broken. Meanwhile, Kieran and Alessa flaunted their relationship. Paparazzi captured them at high-end restaurants, jetting off to exotic locations. Alessa moved into the mansion, redecorating it to erase all traces of Lena. She replaced the furniture, tore down photos, and even got rid of the baby's nursery that Lena had spent months preparing. It was as if she had never existed. Lena tried to stay strong, but despair crept in. There were moments when she felt like giving up, when she wondered how much more she could endure. But every time she thought about surrendering to the darkness, she felt the baby kick. It was a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child. She had lost everything. She had no home, no money, and no allies. But she still had one thing left: determination. She wasn't going to let Kieran win. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to rise again. Lena woke up in yet another cheap motel, her body aching from the stiff mattress and the weight of stress pressing down on her. The walls were thin, and she could hear the muffled sounds of traffic outside, a reminder that the world kept moving, even though hers had fallen apart. Her funds were running out quickly. She had been stretching every dollar, but she knew she wouldn't last much longer. The fear of what would happen next loomed over her like a storm cloud. She had tried everything. She had called old friends, distant relatives, even former colleagues from her past life before Kieran. But no one wanted to get involved. It wasn't just that people were unwilling to help. It was that Kieran had made sure she had nowhere to turn. He had stripped her of financial security, ruined her reputation, and isolated her so completely that she had no safety net. Her pregnancy was getting harder. Every step felt heavier, and exhaustion consumed her. She knew stress wasn't good for the baby, but how could she stay calm when she had no idea what tomorrow would bring? The thought of ending up on the streets terrified her. She needed a plan, but every option seemed impossible. Desperation pushed her towards something she had never imagined doing, reaching out to a stranger. She spent hours online, searching for shelters and support groups for pregnant women in crisis. It was humiliating to go from living in a mansion to begging for help, but she had no choice. She found a small organization that provided temporary housing for women in need. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, and for the first time in weeks she felt a glimmer of hope. She packed her few belongings and made her way there, hoping that this place would be her first step toward rebuilding her life. The shelter was a modest building, nothing like the luxury she had been used to, but it felt warm, welcoming. The other women there had stories of their own. Some had fled abusive relationships. Others had been abandoned like she had. For the first time since her world had crumbled, Lena didn't feel completely alone. She spent her days attending counseling sessions and trying to figure out her next steps. The shelter provided her with basic necessities, but it was temporary. She needed a way to support herself before the baby arrived. She started applying for jobs, but her resume was thin. She had spent years being Kieran's wife, attending charity events and managing social circles, but she had no real work experience. Every rejection email felt like another door slamming in her face. One afternoon, as she scrolled through job postings on a borrowed laptop, she stumbled upon an article about Ashen Holt, the CEO of Holt Industries. He was one of the most powerful business figures in the country, known for his sharp instincts and ruthless ambition. But what caught Lena's attention was something else. He was one of Kieran's biggest rivals. She remembered how Kieran used to speak about Ashen with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. The two men had clashed in business many times, and Kieran had always seen him as a threat. An idea began to form in Lena's mind. It was risky, and she had no guarantee that it would work, but she had nothing left to lose. She spent the next few days researching everything about Holt Industries. Ashen was known for taking bold risks, for recognizing potential where others saw failure. If she could get a meeting with him, maybe she could convince him that she was worth something, that she could be useful. It took every ounce of courage. She had, but she sent an email to Holt Industries, requesting a meeting. She explained her situation, not as a plea for pity, but as a proposal. She had knowledge of Kieran's empire, of how he operated. Maybe that information could be valuable. Didn't expect a response, but the next day, an email arrived. Ashen Holt wanted to meet her. Lena stood outside the towering glass skyscraper of Holt Industries, her heart pounding as she stared up at the massive building. The morning air was crisp, and the bustling city moved around her, but she felt frozen in place. This was her last chance. If this meeting didn't work out, she had nowhere else to turn. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, her nerves tightening as she approached the receptionist. The woman barely glanced at her before directing her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. As the doors slid open, she stepped into an office that exuded power. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline, sleek furniture, and an air of authority that was almost suffocating. At the center of it all sat Ashen Holt. He was nothing like Kieran. Where Kieran had been charming and polished, Ashen radiated a quiet intensity. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He wanted to know why she was there, what she could possibly offer him. Lena knew this was her only opportunity, so she spoke with confidence she didn't feel. She told him about Kieran's empire, how he manipulated deals, evaded taxes, and hid assets. She explained the powerful connections he had, the tactics he used to stay ahead of his competitors. She laid everything out, knowing that the information she carried could be a weapon in the right hands. Ashen listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, and Lena felt doubt creeping in. Had she miscalculated? Had she just humiliated herself? But then he leaned back in his chair, considering her words carefully. He didn't offer sympathy or false reassurances. He asked hard questions, testing her knowledge, making sure she wasn't just another desperate person trying to sell him empty promises. By the time the meeting ended, Lena had no idea if she had impressed him or if he was merely humoring her. He didn't give her an answer right away. He simply told her he would think about it. She left the office feeling hollow. Had she just made a fool of herself? Had she wasted what little dignity she had left? The uncertainty gnawed at her as she returned to the shelter. Days passed, and there was no word from Ashen. The weight of disappointment settled over her like a heavy fog. Maybe she had overestimated herself. Maybe she had nothing of real value to offer. Then, just when she was about to give up hope, an unexpected email arrived. Holt Industries had arranged a temporary living space for her, a fully furnished apartment in a secure building. There was no explanation, no promise of a job, just an address and a confirmation that everything had been taken care of. Lena sat staring at the message, disbelief washing over her. Ashen hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. This was something. It was more than she had expected. She moved into the apartment that evening. It was modest compared to the mansion she had once lived in, but to her it felt like a palace. It was safe, warm, and for the first time in weeks, she had a real bed to sleep in. The refrigerator was stocked, the bathroom was clean, and there was even a note from Holt Industries instructing her to rest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of relief. She wasn't saved yet, but she had taken the first step. She had found someone willing to give her a chance. But she also knew one thing. Ashen Holt was a man who never did anything without a reason. Whatever he had planned for her, it was only the beginning. Lena woke up in the unfamiliar apartment, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting a golden glow over the neatly arranged furniture. It still felt surreal. Just days ago, she had been struggling to find shelter, living with the constant fear of what tomorrow would bring. Now she had a roof over her head and a chance, though she wasn't sure what it truly meant. She couldn't let herself become comfortable. Ashen Holt wasn't a man who offered kindness for free. He had given her this apartment, arranged for her safety, but he hadn't explained why. There was no contract, no job offer, just an unspoken understanding that he had plans for her. And Lena knew that whatever those plans were, they would involve Kieran. She spent the next few days regaining her strength, eating proper meals, and letting herself rest for the first time in weeks. But the uncertainty never left her. Then, an email arrived from Holt Industries, instructing her to meet Ashen at his private office that evening. It was direct, with no hint of what the meeting was about. Lena arrived at the Holt estate, a grand property that was just as luxurious as the mansion she had once lived in with Kieran. But unlike Kieran's home, which had been a place of control and deception, this estate felt different. The security was tight, the atmosphere professional. She was led inside and escorted to a sleek conference room where Ashen was waiting, along with a team of legal and financial experts. They got straight to the point. Ashen had reviewed the information she had given him, verifying every claim she made about Kieran's hidden dealings. It was solid, so much so that he had already begun moving against him. But that wasn't all. He wanted Lena to be part of it. She had assumed he would use the information and then cast her aside, but Ashen had a different plan. He wanted her to be the face of the attack against Kieran. She had lived inside his world, knew his weaknesses, understood his business strategies, in ways no outsider ever could. If she agreed to work with Holt Industries, she wouldn't just expose Kieran, she would help dismantle everything he had built. It was a dangerous offer. Lena knew that if Kieran found out, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy her completely. But at the same time, it was a chance to fight back. A chance to take back control of her life, she agreed. From that moment, everything moved quickly. With Holt Industries backing her, Lena was given a new identity in the business world. She was no longer the abandoned wife of Kieran Alistair. She was now an independent consultant working alongside Ashen's team to expose corruption in the corporate world. Articles were leaked to the press, stories of Kieran's unethical dealings began spreading, and the financial authorities started investigating. Kieran's empire began to crumble. Investors pulled out, stocks plummeted, and the once invincible Billionaire found himself facing a wave of legal troubles. But Kieran wasn't the type of man to go down quietly. He fought back, using his influence to try and shut down the attacks. He attempted to silence the media, bribed officials, and even tried to track Lena down. But with Ashen's resources protecting her, he couldn't touch her. The final blow came when Holt Industries acquired one of Kieran's most valuable companies. It was a strategic move, one that cut him off from a significant portion of his wealth. It was over. The man who had once thrown his pregnant wife onto the streets had lost everything. Lena, now financially secure and independent, finally had her freedom. She was no longer the woman who had been betrayed and discarded. She had rebuilt herself, and this time, no one would ever take away her power again.